All right, let me take you through our top story here. Of course, the entire country, maybe the world at this point, is speaking of how the Air India plane crashed. What was the reason for the crash? Now, days after India's worst aviation tragedy in recent years, a new report by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau has quietly but surely shifted attention here, it appears, towards the pilots. While the AAIB's preliminary report does not directly blame the crew, it leaves behind a crucial audio snippet from the cockpit that's raised more questions than answers. One pilot is in fact heard asking, "Why did you cut it off?" The other pilot replies, "I did not do so." That's it. There's no names and who said what. No explanation further on this paraphrasing. But, well, here's what exactly the report said. In plain English, if I can explain to you what the report establishes. The Air India flight that took off from Ahmedabad crashed within minutes, killing all 240 people on board, and then the rest of them were on ground. 260 in total who died. In fact, the aircraft, according to the report, has 2 engines and each had fuel control switches. These switches must always stay in the run position for the engines to function. Within seconds of takeoff, both these switches allegedly moved to cut off as per the report. And that means fuel supply to the engines had stopped. A few seconds later, both switches were turned back to run, clearly an attempt to revive power. But by then, the aircraft was too low. There just wasn't enough altitude left to recover from there. The switches were later found in the wreckage, and what they saw at that point was the switches was in run position. So there was an attempt to revive it, but it was too low and too late by then. Now, what's even more critical is that aviation experts say that these switches cannot be accidentally moved. They have stop locks and require a deliberate upward lift to change positions. So it's very hard to believe that the pilot mindlessly confused the switch and may have not put it in a run position and rather pushed it to cut-off position. These are claims that have initially been established in this report, but how far is it true? We've got to wait for the full report to come out, which will only be in 2 to 3 months. But still, fingers now in a way being pointed at the pilots. Now, what the report also establishes is that there's no mechanical failure that's been flagged, which means the focus now squarely on the pilot's action. The backlash from the pilot community has been swift as well. The Indian Commercial Pilots Association has now called the narrative around pilot suicide or error by these pilots as deeply disturbing and entirely speculative. In their words, in fact, this kind of talk without verified evidence is not only unethical, it's also disservice to the profession. Of course, pilot unions are also now questioning why Boeing's track record and a previous FAA warning in 2018 about faulty fuel switch locks hasn't been looked at seriously.
Now you have put out something which is more confusing than when it started off, and it clearly indicates that the pilot is at fault without telling that the pilot is at fault. And the entire media has taken it up, so much so that people are even saying it's a deliberate act of sabotage slash suicide. This is what we were saying is irresponsible, and this would lead to further speculations among the public.
Now, so here's what we still don't know, and to give us a little more insights into this, I have with me panelists. If these switches can't move on their own, what could have really caused them to switch to cut off? If the pilots haven't done it, could this have been an automatic button switch? Now, that's very hard to believe. Why hasn't the possibility of a mechanical or a software fault, especially with Boeing's past record, been fully explored as well? Now, we know that this is an interim report. We're waiting for the full one to come by. But let's find out from our guests here. I have Captain Sanjay Karve with me, aviation expert and former accountable manager, aviation government of Maharashtra. He's worked. Captain Akshay Chopra, aviation expert and former IAF pilot. We also have Umesh Raja, who's an aviation expert. Thanks very much, all of you, for joining us. Captain Sanjay, your first take on the report, which has been criticized by the pilot community, saying it directly points fingers at the pilots, calling it a human error, and that's not fair. It's disservice to the profession. But how do you decode this report here?
Nabila, this is a very interesting report. It hides much more than it lets what people know or what people want to know. If you see the time frame from the time the ATC has cleared the aircraft to roll or to take off till the time it has crashed, it's roughly 94 seconds. And in this 94 seconds, the AIB has found only 1.5 sentence which it has made public. Are we to believe that there was no talk in the cockpit, no V1 calls, no V2 calls, when the engine cut down, no audio warnings, nothing? So there seems to be an attempt, or there is a perception, or there seems to be an attempt to hide much more than what they want to let us know. What is it that the AIB does not want people to know out of those 94 seconds conversation in the cockpit? Why is it that they have suddenly kept quiet about those 92 or 93 seconds? And why this insistence only on this? My second question is, how was this report available to the foreign media much prior to it being published? In fact, BBC and CNN had gone to town publishing that nothing wrong with the aircraft. It was pilot error. Now, a report which is supposed to be confidential, which is supposed to be released by the government, is available to everyone other than the Indian people. And the way it has been worded, it seemingly points the finger at the aircrew, giving a very clean chit to Boeing, GE, Air India, maintenance, and everything else, which I think is grossly unfair. I agree, it's a preliminary report. But all the more reason, if it's a preliminary report, don't make it sound that you have already made up your mind and now you are trying to work out things so as to justify your preliminary findings. This is totally uncalled for, and I don't think that this report is an unbiased report. This report has been put in a manner that it leads you to a very specific direction, whether right or wrong. Now, this leads me to a worry that even the final report may be just a cover up. We really don't know.
I'm not too sure about if this report really has enough clarity on what electrical sources were powering those essential systems during the period between the flame out and the rat deployment. These are technical terms, but certainly something that we need an answer to. Umesh, who's also an aviation expert, would you want to jump in on this, Umesh, on fingers being pointed at the pilot, calling this human error, some calling this a suicide act?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nabila, for having me on the show. And well, to start with, I completely agree with the gentleman who just took the dais first, and I think it's too harsh to put the blame directly on pilots, without a detailed introspection and investigation, technical analysis, and then reaching to a final conclusion as such. Yeah, so that's something very sad what we are seeing here. Now, this is a preliminary report, and what has been done is that the center of attraction has been made to those switches, the fuel switches which are on the center board of the in the cockpit, and that has been the center of attraction for everybody all across the group. But then that is not the only thing the issue can happen with. Let us also understand that a dual engine failure, which is basically a flameout which is happening, have multiple reasons behind it. So just because you happen to see the particular switch in a particular situation, in a particular mode on the FDR recording, doesn't mean that nothing happened prior to that, or there was no other issue which could be probably additionally causing this flame out. So what they have said is that in the report is that fuel short happened, fuel supply was cut off because of this switch, and then what happened is engine went to the flame out position, and then the entire thing collapsed. Now, as per the deep training, what the pilots get, what they've been trained to handle the situation, and especially when we see that the pilot and the co-pilot, both the people are so much experienced. They have one is the ATPL license holder, one is the CPL license holder with so many hours of flying experience. They also have an endorsement on the specific aircraft model as such. So we don't expect somebody to do this out of the blue, as rightly said earlier also. So the report, what has come is, I feel it's a bit ambiguous. It links too much towards the pilot error, and certain important aspects have been completely ignored. Like, let me tell you, for example, the FDR records the data of this particular switch movement to cut off and then back to run. The rack deployment also has been recorded clearly. But then if you see one line which says thereafter they spoke to each other, and one pilot asked, "Have you cut the fuel?" And the other replied, "No, I have not." Where is the timeline for that? Did it happen before the switch cut off? Did it happen after the switch cut off? Or was it because of the switch? Or was it something to do with the alerts? Maybe they have seen the alerts.
Now,
That
what's interesting is
oral
that there's
alerts which
also
had come.
no clarity on which pilot said that statement.
Correct,
So
correct.
that all the more becomes difficult for us to establish what may have happened. But who's responsible between the two pilots? Who's responsible ideally to switch that button to ensure power supply or fuel supply to those engines? If it's that one easy button, is it easy for a pilot, or is it hard to believe that a pilot can actually be fatigued, tired, lack of sleep, and may have switched the wrong button, as much as several international pilots have been speculating on these lines? Could this
As you
be
right,
possible at
as you
all?
rightly, as you rightly said, Nabila, this is, see, it has a protective gate. Okay, it's not something which is like our on-off switch in the house, what we have electrical switch. It's not that outside type of a switch. This has a gated gate of coverage. You have to lift the lever, then you have to push it further down or up. So that it requires some efforts. It's not something which happens automatically. And remember one thing, this is purely a manual switch. There's nothing automatic to do with this switch. It has to be done manually. It requires efforts. It's done in specific emergencies, in specific cases, when you have to shut off the fuel or when you have to restart. So basically, this is nothing but engine start and off fuel, or start and off button. You know how we have in our cars,
So
where
it's
you
not a
switch on.
simple press on and off button. It's not a simple on and
No,
off button.
no, it's not. So somebody to do that has to definitely apply pressure, do it sensibly, and it doesn't happen on its own. That is one. Now, if the pilot has done it, as it is assumed and informed in the report as well, there has to be some genuine reason behind it. Okay, so in the training, it
No,
is,
but
there
that
are
genuine reason is not being established in the paraphrasing of their
absolutely,
conversation.
that is
Clearly,
where the
both
report is
pilots have
lacking.
been caught by surprise. If we go by the report, both pilots have been caught by surprise. It hasn't been an active move from any one of the pilots where they've done it and are justifying why they've done it. So I'm assuming, and we're all assuming, going by the report, that this was information that both pilots were caught by surprise. One
I
asks,
can tell
"Why
you,
did you do
I
it?"
can
The
tell you
other
one
says,
more
"I
thing.
did not do it." So both are surprised. What happened?
Yes.
Captain, stay with us, Umesh. Captain Akshay Chopra, is it so easy? Is it an on and off button that can really go horribly wrong if there is lack of judgment, or if the pilots are tired, not slept well, they're fatigued? Is it possible that the pilot would have pressed a wrong button by mistake?
Firstly, thank you for having me on your show, and I would like to start with a quote, and I'm afraid I'm being a bit blunt here.
Yeah.
When billions are involved, lives don't matter, and we were all afraid the moment this incident happened with the 787 Dreamliner. From day one, we were afraid that the blame may come on the pilots. Uh, Also, let's connect the dots and understand what the report says and what exactly people are trying to put it here. Firstly, the entire takeoff till VR rotation was absolutely uneventful. Had the switches been off there, the aircraft wouldn't have the power to take off. Till 180 knots, there was absolutely no problem with the takeoff. After that, one of the pilots looks at the switches and he says, "Okay, why did you do it?" Other says, "I did not do it." Now, when you're in a takeoff situation, both the pilots, one is having both his hands on the control because it's a manual takeoff. So there is no way that one pilot will be able to do it. Another pilot who must have noticed this but what I can understand is the pilot whose hands were not on the control. I mean, he was not the one flying the aircraft, and he must have noticed this and must have asked it. However, in both the cases and in the entire duration of takeoff, there is absolutely no reason for anybody to even touch those switches. There are only two reasons these switches are touched. Number one is when you land back, you switch off the aircraft, and when the engines are switched off, and then these fuel switches are put to cut off. Or in case in flight there is an engine failure, then following a proper procedure, you shut down the engine and shut down that particular switch whose engine failure has occurred. There is no other reason for somebody to touch these switches. As everybody knows, these are spring-loaded switches. You can't just put up and down. But I do not understand why are we simply not accepting or neglecting the 2018 Federal Aviation Administration a bulletin where it said that these switches have been malfunctioning, the spring loading mechanism has been malfunctioning, which simply means that even with basic vibration or basic jolt, these switches can go down. There can be a problem in these switches. So this is something which we are neglecting. Now, I have seen, I don't know how come there are even senior people saying it can be a suicide angle. Firstly, there is absolutely no medical report anywhere in the media or anywhere officially which has confirmed any medical problem with either of the crew.
Yeah.
The angle of crew being fatigued and all can be a part, but this is not where this thing comes in. I'm telling you, I've been a flyer. Even if we are fatigued, not slept for 2 days, there is no reason that in such a situation we'll not be able to handle the emergency. Also, the aircraft, in case there is suicide angle, then these switches will not be put back into run position. Both the engines, within next 4 seconds, these switches were put off one by one to run positions. Both the engines started responding. One responded nicely, other could not pick up, and because of low altitude, the aircraft went down. Before that, there was a mayday call. The aircraft went down a level flight. It simply means both the pilots, with all their experience, tried their best to pull the aircraft and make sure it takes off. So there is absolutely, I do not
Has
understand
it
where does
ever happened, Captain Sanjay, has it ever happened that the switch button from cut off to run to cut off has been noticed by pilots and they've basically managed to maneuver through it? Has it ever happened in the past with a Boeing flight?
See, in 2018, there were a couple of airlines which reported that they had a problem with this fuel cutoff switch. And the same was reported to Boeing and to FAA. So FAA came out with an advisory. What I'm surprised is the normal aviation practices, anything to do with fuel system or an engine system, it always will be an airworthiness directive or a alert bulletin, not an advisory. Why this advisory has come up, no one has any idea. My wild guess would be with about 4,000 737s and 787s flying, Boeing really did not have adequate spares to change all of these parts. And so they let it go with the airlines to decide whether they would like to change it, whether they would like to have a look at it or not. Like even now, after this accident, Etihad and Singapore Airlines have gone on their own, including the Korean Airlines, to cross check the switches. Only after these airlines have mandated that the switches have to be checked. Now DGC has come out saying that Indian carriers operating 737 and 787 must check this fuel control switch. Now, if there is a problem, like it was brought out, if there's a problem with the mechanical switches or the mechanical lock, it is very much possible that the switch can go to an off position. It is highly possible that during the takeoff roll, when the pilot flying, the pilot monitoring noticed this, there must have been a caption on the cabin and audio warning. So he asked. And thereafter, he switched the switch back to on position so that the engine lights up. In fact, if you look at the report, what I'm amused is one section of the report says the throttles were at idle. The second part of the report says the DFDR says the throttles were at the max thrust setting. So I really don't know what exactly has AAIB looked at. Yes, I will grant them that the jerk or the impact may have put the throttle back, but shouldn't this have been brought very clearly? Like, look, there is a mismatch. What the DFDR tells us and what the throttle position is. And if the throttle position is too idle, it makes sense to me that the crew was attempting a restart because you cannot have a throttle fully forward and attempt a restart. So there are a lot of mismatches in that report, and it is not very clear. It appears that they are trying to maintain that 30 days deadline. Do not offend the bigwigs. And my biggest query is What has happened to the rest 92 seconds of conversation in the cockpit? Why is it that 92 seconds is not being made public? Or is it hurting someone? Or the truth which will come out is not going to be palatable to many. So that is why they come out only with this 1.5 sentence. 1.5 sentence in a 94 seconds of recording? I am really amazed.
So, in that case, I feel all three of our experts here believe that pointing fingers at the pilot at this point is too premature. Well, you have Air India in a way clarifying, or at least they call it a clarification, that as per their investigation, the Boeing aircraft's buttons were absolutely fine. There was nothing wrong with the buttons. So, if Air India itself, in a way, is already given a clean sheet to Boeing, seemingly, then what's left for imagination? Sir Umesh?
Yeah, that is a fact actually. But let us not forget that advisory which came out in 2018. That advisory was very clear that it is not a mandatory requirement. It just gave a guidance that if it's required, it needs to be when the flights are on the ground, the airlines has to do the inspection, and if they see that this is the lock is disengaged, then they have to get that replaced. But again, it mentioned very clearly it's nothing to do with airworthiness, and it is not very important to be done immediately. So that clarity was as one of the panelists said, it was an advisory, but it was not a mandatory requirement, which was very clearly mentioned in the one-pager FAAA guidance. So maybe probably we see that gives a benefit of doubt to Air India. Air India can come up saying that it was not mandatory, it was just an advisory, and that is why we did not do it. And you can't catch neck of Air India based on that advisory. Point number two, whether this switch was actually the lock was disengaged one, or was it a proper locking condition switch, is something which we have to find out, which only the airline will be able to tell if they've done that inspection earlier and what is the status of that. And as rightly said, that we saw that it's the throttle is in idle position. So there is no doubt that there was a relight attempt done by the pilots. They were trying to get the engine back on track with the process, the SOP operation, which is a memory operation basically. And unfortunately, because of the altitude being falling and the process takes a bit of a time, and at that altitude, you really can't expect the engines spool up to that fast, and that in fact resulted in this calamity. So fuel cutoff, what they talk about fuel not reaching the engine and engine getting filled is I don't have any doubts on that. That, in my opinion, personal opinion, that's exactly what has happened. What has happened is fuel has not reached the engine. Fuel has been cut off, and engine died because of this fuel starvation. However, the contention that pilot did this or pilot pushed this switch, which resulted in this. Well, there
But
are multiple reasons.
in the report, in a way, without naming names or blaming the pilots, actually points fingers at the pilots itself. But the possibility of a mechanical failure, software fault, is this Boeing's issue? Considering Boeing's past record, all of that will have to be established. How long will that take? As I come to a close here, my last question to Captain Akshay, would you be able to give us a sense on how long will this investigation take to finally complete?
As the preliminary findings are out now, and I think next couple of weeks or maybe a few months, and we should be out with the final report. And we all hope that this time, they don't do what what we're afraid of. That blaming the pilots is the easiest thing to be done at this stage with so many big names involved. And we hope that it's an unbiased report which comes out now.
But I have a question on why is the cockpit voice snippets being released in fragments? Why not the full transcript?
Yeah, in fact, Captain Karve was right, and in fact, it's so many captains and so many pilots are asking the same question, that in the entire flight you had only one sentence and then the mayday call. What about rest of the conversation? It's a panic situation when such an emergency happens at 200 or 300 feet. Both the engines are going down, and there are too many conversations. They'll be literally shouting for a lot of things here and there. It'll be a panic in the cockpit, and they have released just two. So this is like again. it seems like they're trying to, link up those sentences and somehow reach to a conclusion that it was ultimately the pilots who must
Yeah,
have done
if it's
something.
just two sentences where one pilot is asking the other, why did you do it? What does it suggest? No, this is a sad state of affairs. If you're saying it's highly impossible, it's next to impossible for the pilots to have erred in such a fashion, then this report really could be real hogwash. We're not, of course, casting aspersions as yet. We're still going to have faith that they did it in good stride, good spirit, and with expertise. But I refuse to believe if the Air India crash investigators here are free from bias entirely. A final word, Captain Sanjay, could they be free from bias here? Who do you think stands to benefit with a report like this?
With a report like this, it is very obvious. It is the Boeing and the GE which stand to benefit. It's very straightforward. You're clearly given them a clean check, saying that, look, there's a one pilot has asked the other pilot. My question is, if the pilots were attempting to commit a suicide, like someone has pointed out, why should they attempt a relight thereafter? Where was the reason to go in for restarting the engines? There was no reason in that case. They should have just kept quiet. There's no reason to give a mayday call. Why has all this been done? To me, this is a narrative directed in a particular direction. And let us hope, if you remember, the 737 MAX, the first two accidents which took place, initially everyone blamed the pilot. They said pilot error, pilots do not know how to handle the emergency. It was only when the detailed report came out, they realized that the problem was MCAPs. The problem was not the pilots. But for the first 3 months, the narrative built up by everyone was the pilots are at fault. So let us not jump to
But
the
why will the
conclusion.
investigators here investigating the Indian air crash want to benefit Boeing? Do you believe that Boeing has their people also as part of the investigative team?
They are very much there. Boeing, NTSB, they have an observer status, but they were very much part of the inquiry.
Okay, so they're very much part of the inquiry. Umesh, I'll take that final word from you.
Yeah, this, as rightly said, NTSB has their representative in this whole process. They are on an observer status, but definitely being in US based observer, I think it still has benefit of doubt. So I think it should be an independent inquiry, completely independent. And moreover, also one more thing I want to add here is that it should be more detailed. Now, this 15-page report, maybe if you remove the photographs, hardly you have 9 or 10 pages. I mean, no report comes like this in a preliminary basis. Preliminary report should have data, concrete data from the FDRs. It should have the entire script of the voice recorders. There are so many things. Have they analyzed what caused failures? What exactly happened when the switch was turned? What time? Why that time gap between the RAT deployment and the switch going back to run? I mean, there are so many intricacies
Right.
which needs to be
So
explored.
let's
All that
wait
is
for the
more.
full report, and until then, all what we speak will only be speculatory. But one thing's for sure, that nobody within the aviation industry is happy with this report that's come out, in a way indirectly pointing fingers at the pilot. None of them believe that there has any fit facts that establishes that the pilots were at fault. So let's keep that as an end note here before I wrap this. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time for joining us here today.